We had been married for 7 years when our first child was born. I still remember the moment my wife, Jessica, handed me our baby girl. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked into the face of our daughter. Jessica smiled, tired but radiant, and I believed in that moment that we had everything: love, a family, a future. Things were perfect, or so I thought. I had a steady job, Jessica had been a loving wife, and we were both excited about the prospect of raising a family together. But as our daughter turned 2, little cracks began to show. Jessica seemed distant. She started spending more time with friends, going on weekend trips she claimed were girls' nights or work-related. I didn't think much of it at first. Marriage can get routine. I knew that, and I didn't want to be the overly suspicious husband. Then came the second pregnancy. Jessica was glowing again, and even though she had been a little distant, I thought the arrival of another baby would bring us closer. I believed that things would settle down, that we would feel that closeness we used to have. I thought becoming parents again would reignite the spark we had lost somewhere along the way. It wasn't until our son was born that everything came crashing down. The birth was hard. Complications had Jessica bedridden for weeks afterward. I took time off work to care for her, juggling everything as best I could, but there was always something strange in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then one evening, as I was cleaning up the kitchen while our newborn slept, I overheard her on the phone. Jessica was whispering, but I caught a few words that froze me in my tracks. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. I'll figure it out soon." She hung up quickly when she realized I was nearby, and for the first time, I felt my stomach twist with dread. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. Something was wrong. After overhearing that phone conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. The way Jessica had snapped her phone shut, the nervous look in her eyes when she realized I was close. It all planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. But how could I confront her without sounding paranoid? I decided not to bring it up just yet, to gather my thoughts and see if I was jumping to conclusions. For the next couple of weeks, I became more observant. Jessica's behavior continued to raise alarms. She was still distant, more glued to her phone than usual, often leaving the room to take calls or sending texts with a secrecy that gnawed at me. Late-night work meetings became a regular occurrence, and although she always had an explanation, I couldn't ignore the growing pit in my stomach. I started to doubt myself. I told myself I was being paranoid, that stress from caring for a newborn and the challenges of marriage were warping my perception. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The woman I loved seemed to be slipping away, and I had no idea why. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Jessica left her phone on the counter while she took a shower. It was unlocked. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. This was my chance. I felt guilty even considering it, but the nagging suspicion was too strong to ignore. With shaky hands, I picked up her phone and started scrolling through her messages. What I found shattered me. There was an ongoing conversation with someone named D. They weren't explicit, but the nature of the text was clear. He was asking how she was, what she was wearing, when they could meet next. My blood ran cold as I realized this was the same person she had whispered to on the phone weeks earlier. She wasn't just being distant. She was hiding something. This was no ordinary work colleague. My heart raced as I scrolled back further, seeing the late-night messages, the hidden meetups. I felt sick to my stomach. But what truly broke me was a photo buried deep in the conversation. A selfie of Jessica and this man, with his arm wrapped around her, smiling in a way I hadn't seen her smile in months. They were in a hotel room. That's when I realized she wasn't just emotionally distant. She had already moved on in ways I hadn't even imagined. I dropped the phone and sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. How could this be happening? How long had this been going on? The betrayal was like a punch to the gut, a physical pain that spread through my whole body. As the sound of the shower stopped, I put the phone back exactly where it had been. Jessica walked out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, looking at me with that same distant expression she had worn for weeks. I forced a smile, pretending everything was normal, but inside, my world was crumbling. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know where to start. The woman I loved had betrayed me, and I had no idea how to confront her or what the truth would do to our family. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I tried to act normal, for the sake of the kids, but the weight of what I discovered gnawed at me every day. I couldn't bear to look at Jessica without feeling an overwhelming wave of anger, sadness, and confusion. Every time I saw her hold our son, I wondered, was he even mine? It was a thought I hated myself for having. But after seeing her text with that man, I couldn't help but wonder how long the affair had been going on. Was it possible she had been with him during the time she got pregnant? Every time I held my son, a beautiful baby boy who looked so much like her, I felt sick for even doubting. But the doubt wouldn't go away. I couldn't keep living with that uncertainty. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. One afternoon, while Jessica was out, I took a hair sample from our son and sent it off for a DNA test. The guilt I felt was unbearable. What if I was wrong? What if he was mine, and I had been doubting him all along? But what if I was right? I didn't know which answer would hurt more. The results took weeks to arrive, and every day felt like a lifetime. Jessica carried on as if nothing was wrong, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I tried to act normal, but the tension between us was palpable. I was distant, cold, and she started to notice. She asked me if something was bothering me, but I always brushed it off, not ready to confront her. Not yet. Then the envelope came. I stared at it for hours before I finally had the courage to open it. My hands trembled as I read the words that would change everything. The child is not biologically related to you. Time seemed to stop. My legs gave way beneath me, and I sat on the floor, the letter clutched in my shaking hands. The child I had been loving, caring for, and protecting wasn't mine. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a lie that had consumed my entire life. My world shattered in that moment. I didn't know who I was anymore, or what my family had become. Everything I thought I knew had been a lie. I knew then that I had to confront Jessica. There was no more pretending. The truth had finally come out, and there was no turning back. The evening after I received the DNA test results, I sat on the couch, my mind in a haze. My thoughts were racing, but nothing made sense anymore. The pain was suffocating. How could the child I had held, nurtured, and loved not be mine? How could Jessica betray me so deeply? I waited for her to come home, barely able to look at our son without feeling a mixture of love and despair. When Jessica walked through the door, she smiled at me. An ordinary smile, like everything was normal. I felt an intense rage rise within me, but I held it in. I needed to stay calm. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low, shaking. Her smile faded. "What's wrong?" I couldn't bear to drag this out. I handed her the DNA test results, my hands trembling. She stared at the paper, confusion etched on her face, before her expression shifted into something that looked like fear. What is this?" she stammered, her voice faltering. "It's the truth, Jessica. He's not my son, is he?" Her face went pale, and she looked down at the paper, her eyes wide. I didn't think it would come to this," she whispered. "Come to what? How long? Jessica, how long have you been lying to me? How long have you been with him?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen, I swear. It was a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you." I stood there, numb, as she crumbled in front of me. "A mistake? Jessica, this is not just a mistake. You've been lying to me for years. You've let me believe he was my son." She started crying, but it didn't move me. Not anymore. I had heard enough apologies, enough excuses. "I never wanted you to find out," she sobbed. "I was going to end it. I thought—" "You thought what?" I interrupted. "That I would never find out? That you could keep living this lie?" She didn't answer. She just cried, her face buried in her hands, but I couldn't feel anything for her. The love I once had for her was buried under layers of betrayal. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice hollow. Her head snapped up. "No, please, we can fix this. We can." "There's nothing left to fix," I replied. "You killed everything the moment you let another man into our lives. You've taken away everything I thought we had." She pleaded, but I was done listening. The trust was shattered, and there was no coming back from this, In the days following the confrontation, Jessica tried everything to make amends. She apologized relentlessly, begged for forgiveness, even promised to cut off all contact with the other man. But it was too late. I couldn't even look at her without seeing the betrayal. Every smile she gave me felt like a lie. Every touch felt wrong. Our house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a battlefield. I slept in the guest room while she stayed in the master bedroom with our son. The child, her son, was innocent in all of this, and that was the hardest part. Every time I saw him, my heart ached. He had no idea that his existence was the result of an affair. I didn't want him to suffer because of his mother's choices, but I couldn't shake the pain of knowing he wasn't mine. I tried to distance myself emotionally, but it was impossible. I had raised this boy, loved him. He called me daddy. How could I just walk away from that? But every time I looked at him, the DNA test haunted me. He wasn't my son. No matter how much I wanted to pretend otherwise, the truth was staring me in the face. My family and close friends noticed the strain between Jessica and me, but I didn't tell them the full story. I wasn't ready to admit to the world what had happened, to hear their pity or judgment. For now, I kept it between us, but the weight of the secret was crushing. I began researching divorce lawyers, trying to figure out the best way forward. Jessica still held out hope that we could reconcile, but I knew deep down that it was over. Every time she reached out, I pulled further away. About a week after our confrontation, I learned more about the man Jessica had been seeing. His name was David, and they had met through work. He was older, divorced, and from what I gathered, he had no interest in settling down. I had seen his face in the photos she exchanged with him, but now I needed to know more about this man who had ruined my life. I found him online, scrolling through his social media. He looked exactly how I imagined, a middle-aged man with a smug smile, posting pictures of his expensive lifestyle, always surrounded by beautiful women. He had been in and out of relationships, clearly someone who didn't care about the damage he left behind. It made me sick. How could Jessica throw away everything we had for a man like that? How could she let him into our lives and keep it hidden for so long? The more I learned about him, the angrier I became. It wasn't just Jessica's betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that she had chosen him. Part of me wanted to confront David, to yell at him, to demand answers. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. He didn't owe me anything. He hadn't been the one who broke our vows. Jessica had. My anger belonged with her. No matter how much I wanted to blame someone else as the weeks went on, things between Jessica and me only got worse. She tried to make things work, but I had shut down emotionally. Every time she tried to talk to me, I responded with cold indifference. I couldn't open up to her, couldn't allow myself to feel anything but the pain of her betrayal. One night, after the kids were asleep, Jessica broke down again. She came into the guest room, where I had been staying for the last few weeks, and begged me to talk to her. "Please, we have to talk about this," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't keep living like this." I stared at the wall, refusing to meet her eyes. "There's nothing to talk about." "There is," she cried, her voice rising. "You won't even try to fix this. You won't give us a chance to make things right." I turned to face her, finally letting the anger I had been holding and spill out. "How am I supposed to fix this, Jessica? You lied to me. For years, you let me believe that boy was mine, and he's not. You had an affair. You built a life with someone else behind my back. There's no coming back from that." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't feel any sympathy. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize anymore. I didn't see a way forward, not with the betrayal looming over us. "I want a divorce," I said again, my voice firm. "I'm done pretending that we can fix this." She cried harder, but I stood my ground. I had made my decision. There was no going back. Telling my family about the affair and the impending divorce was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. My parents had always adored Jessica, and my siblings admired the life we had built together. To them, we were the perfect couple, the kind of relationship people envied. They had no idea what had been happening behind closed doors. I called my parents first. My mom answered, cheerful as always, and I immediately felt a lump in my throat. I didn't know how to start, but I knew I had to tell them the truth. Mom, something happened. I began, my voice shaky. What's wrong? She asked, her tone shifting to concern. I took a deep breath. Jessica, she cheated on me. And the baby, our son, he's not mine. There was silence on the other end of the line. My mom's breath hitched, and I could tell she was struggling to find the right words. Oh, honey, she finally said, her voice soft with disbelief. Are you sure? I did a DNA test. He's not mine, Mom. I don't know what to do. I heard my dad's voice in the background, asking what was going on. My mom started explaining the situation, and I could hear the shock and anger in her voice as she told him. Do you need to come home? She asked after a pause. You can stay with us if you need to. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, I'll figure things out. I just needed to tell you. They offered support, but there wasn't much they could do to fix the devastation I felt. Telling them made it real. It made the situation even more painful, knowing that everyone who had believed in our marriage would now see it for what it truly was. A lie that I met with a divorce lawyer the following week. Sitting in the lawyer's office, everything felt surreal. I had never imagined my life coming to this, discussing custody, division of assets, and the ugly details of a marriage that had collapsed. The lawyer was professional, guiding me through the process, but every word felt like a stab to the heart. Jessica had been blindsided by my decision to file for divorce, but she didn't fight it. There was no point. The damage was too deep, and she knew she had no ground to stand on. We had to talk about the practicalities. How we would divide the house, who would take care of the kids, what our lives would look like after we went our separate ways. The conversations were painful and awkward, but they had to be done. The hardest part was discussing custody of our son. I wanted to be there for him, but how could I raise a child who wasn't mine? He had no idea what was happening. He still called me Daddy, and every time he did, my heart broke all over again. Jessica insisted that I could still be a part of his life, that nothing had to change between him and me, but I couldn't make any promises. How could I be his father when every time I looked at him, I saw the evidence of her betrayal? Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. It was David, the man Jessica had been seeing. I froze as I read his message, a short and smug text that made my blood boil. We need to talk. I had no intention of talking to him, but the curiosity gnawed at me. Why now? Why would he reach out after everything had already fallen apart? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop, and when I walked in, I saw him sitting at a table, casually sipping his drink as if he hadn't played a role in destroying my life. He greeted me with a smirk, his arrogance on full display. So, you know everything now? I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to punch him. What do you want? David leaned back in his chair, looking me over like he was sizing me up. I thought you should know something. Jessica and I. It wasn't just a fling. My heart dropped. What are you talking about? He smiled. We've been seeing each other for years. She wasn't just cheating on you for a few months. It's been going on since before your first child was born. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. What? Yeah, he said nonchalantly. Your daughter might not be yours either. You should get her tested. My mind went blank. This couldn't be happening. I had already lost my son. Was I about to lose my daughter too? I left the coffee shop in a daze, David's words echoing in my head. My daughter. Could she really not be mine too? I didn't want to believe David. His words felt like a cruel trick, but the doubt had already wormed its way into my mind. I couldn't ignore it. If what he said was true, I needed to know. I needed the truth, no matter how devastating it would be. I arranged for a second DNA test, this time for my daughter. The guilt I felt for even questioning her parentage was overwhelming, but after everything I had been through, I couldn't live with the uncertainty. I couldn't be blindsided again. The waiting period for the results was agonizing. I spent sleepless nights wondering if my entire life had been built on a lie. I tried to focus on my daughter, on the bond we shared, but every smile, every laugh, was tainted by doubt. When the results came back, I braced myself for the worst. But this time, the news was different. She was mine. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the damage had already been done. Even though my daughter was mine, I still felt the weight of betrayal from Jessica's affair. The relief of knowing she was my biological child couldn't undo the emotional scars left behind. With the divorce proceedings in full swing, Jessica and I had to figure out how to live together until everything was finalized. The house had become a prison, the air thick with tension. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was only about practical matters. What to do with the kids, how to divide our things, who would move out and when. We both knew it couldn't last forever. One of us had to leave, and Jessica, knowing she had caused the mess, offered to move out. But there was one last argument before she left. "I still love you," she said, her voice trembling as she packed her things. "I made a mistake, but I love you. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her, my heart heavy with everything we had lost. "It's too late, Jessica. Love doesn't survive this kind of betrayal." She stood there, tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't let her see me break. I had cried enough already. This was the end, and there was no going back. When she finally left, the silence in the house was deafening. It was just me and the kids now, trying to rebuild our lives from the rubble of what Jessica had destroyed. Once the divorce was finalized, I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. I had my daughter, and despite everything, I still cared for my son. I couldn't walk away from him completely, even though I knew the truth. He was an innocent child caught in a mess he didn't create. I couldn't punish him for Jessica's actions. Jessica and I remained civil for the sake of the kids. She moved into a small apartment nearby, and we shared custody of our daughter. As for our son, he stayed with Jessica most of the time, but I saw him regularly. I didn't know how to navigate this new relationship, but I knew I couldn't just abandon him. He still called me daddy, and I couldn't take that away from him. I started therapy, trying to process the trauma of the affair, the betrayal, the loss. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I would never heal, when the pain was too much to bear. But slowly, bit by bit, I began to find myself again. As time passed, the wounds began to heal, though the scars remained. I threw myself into being a good father to my daughter and the best version of a father I could be to my son. The anger toward Jessica dulled, replaced by a quiet acceptance that some things in life can't be fixed. We remained in contact, but our conversations were brief and focused solely on the kids. One day, months after the divorce, Jessica called me unexpectedly. She had met someone new and wanted to introduce him to the kids. It was a conversation I had been dreading, but I knew it was inevitable. She had moved on, and I had to accept that. I gave her my blessing, though it was harder than I expected. I wasn't ready to let go completely, but I knew I had to. Our story was over, and it was time for both of us to move forward. Years later, life is different, but better. The pain of the betrayal will always be a part of my story, but it no longer defines me. I found peace in knowing that I did my best, that I loved my children, and that I survived the storm. Jessica and I co-parent our daughter, and I'm still involved in my son's life. He knows the truth now, but we've built a bond that goes beyond biology. He may not be mine by blood, but he's my son in every other way. I've learned to forgive, not just Jessica, but myself. I've learned that life doesn't always go the way we plan, but we can still find happiness in the aftermath of pain. As I look back on everything that happened, I realize that while my marriage ended, it wasn't the end of my life. It was a new beginning, one I never expected but have come to embrace.